Tonight, I'm leading you into the heart of an old cornfield, one most people would pass by without a second thought. But what if I told you that this place, this seemingly ordinary patch of farmland, harbors secrets few have ever lived to tell? A place where people vanish, leaving no trace, just a whisper on the wind and footprints that fade in the rain. Before I go deeper into the story, welcome, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, Echoes of Nightmares, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of the future scary tales. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button too. Also, leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from in the world. Now, back to my story. I remember the first time I heard about it. I was younger then, more curious, eager to uncover tales no one dared speak of. They warned me to leave it alone, to forget what I'd heard. But some stories have a way of creeping into your thoughts, of tugging at your mind until you can't turn away. So, one autumn night, I found myself standing there, on the edge of those rows of corn, staring into the shadows that stretched longer than they should have in the moonlight. This is not just a story, nor is it some local legend passed down to frighten children. What happened here, to those who dared step too far, it will stay with you. Long after the rain fades, long after you close your eyes tonight, you'll find yourself wondering, listening to every creak in the night, every gust of wind. So, I'll ask you just once, are you ready to hear what really happened in that cornfield? Because once you listen, there's no going back. I first saw that cornfield on a late afternoon in early October. The sky was a muted gray, the kind that seems to pull the color out of everything it touches. The field stretched out as far as I could see, an endless wave of dried husks and stalks, swaying softly in the breeze. In the daylight, it looked almost serene, peaceful even. The kind of place you'd barely notice on a quiet drive out of town. Just rows and rows of corn, stretching endlessly under the shadow of the setting sun. But that was the thing about it. The peace wasn't real. It was just a thin layer, hiding something else. It was the kind of field that if you stopped and stared too long, you'd start to feel something staring back. The townsfolk didn't talk about it much, but if you managed to catch someone off guard, especially an elder, you might hear a story or two. The story I heard was from a man named Ray, who'd lived in that town all his life. He was old, worn down by years of hard work and memories that seemed to weigh heavier than his age. I asked him about the field, just making conversation, but he paused, looking at me like he was deciding if he should warn me or if I'd be better off not knowing. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost as if he was afraid the corn might hear. People used to work that field every harvest season, he began. But there came a year, back in the 1920s, when folks started disappearing. At first, it was just one or two, a farmhand who never came back from a shift, a drifter who passed through town and was never seen again. People thought maybe they just moved on, gone somewhere else. But then more vanished men, women, even a young boy once, all swallowed up by that field. By the end of the season, the town had lost count. It was like the field took whoever it wanted, and when it was done, it just went quiet. Ray's voice shook a bit as he told me this, and his eyes grew distant, as if he could still see the faces of those who had never come back. They say on quiet nights, he continued, you can still hear their voices in the wind, lost among the rows of corn, calling out to be found. I'll admit, part of me was skeptical. I'd heard my share of ghost stories after all, and I figured this was just another one. But something about the way Ray spoke, the heaviness in his voice, the way his hands trembled as he spoke, made me wonder if maybe there was more to it. He told me that back then, they'd eventually abandoned the field, left it to grow wild. No one worked it anymore, and anyone foolish enough to venture in after dark, well, they rarely talked about what they'd seen. I couldn't shake the story after that. It lingered in my mind like a shadow, a strange, cold feeling that I couldn't quite explain. I told myself it was just an old legend, a a tale to keep the kids from wandering into the corn at night. But the curiosity was there, gnawing at me, growing stronger every time I drove past that stretch of field. And eventually, I couldn't help myself. I had to see it. One night, I made up my mind. I would go to the field just to take a look. After all, it was just a field, right? I wasn't looking for trouble, just a bit of adventure, a thrill to satisfy my curiosity. But standing there at the edge, I felt something I hadn't expected, a strange silence that crept over me, settling like a weight on my shoulders. The wind had died down. The only sound was the gentle patter of rain. The corn stood motionless, like it was holding its breath. I remember feeling foolish as I looked out over that field. It was just rows of corn, I told myself, nothing more. But as the light faded and the shadows grew longer, I could feel the field change. The air grew colder, heavier, and the peacefulness from earlier seemed to drain away, replaced by a feeling I couldn't quite name. It was as if the field was waiting. The first few nights, nothing happened. I'd head out to the field after dark, listening to the crunch of my boots on the damp soil, the only sound around me. It was just me and the whisper of the corn. I'd walk up to the edge, stare into the shadows, and listen. But there was nothing, just silence, thick and unbroken. But as the nights wore on, things began to change. It was subtle at first, so faint that I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. I'd hear footsteps, soft, almost inaudible, trailing just behind me, stopping the moment I turned to look. Or I'd catch a faint whisper in the air, something just on the edge of hearing, as if the wind itself was trying to tell me a secret. But when I strained to listen, there was only silence. Each night, the feeling grew stronger, that sense of something lurking, watching. On the third night, as I made my way back home, I noticed something strange. My tools, I had left them in a neat pile at the edge of the field, but now they were scattered, strewn across the dirt as if someone had sifted through them. The hammer was half buried in the soil, and a trowel lay several yards away, as though something had moved it. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'd just been careless, left them that way without realizing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I was always careful with my tools. And it wasn't just the tools. By the next night, I started to notice other things. Rows of corn I could have sworn I'd walked past before seemed twisted, out of place. Like the field was shifting, reordering itself behind my back. Then came the fifth night. The rain was coming down harder than before, a steady downpour that soaked through my clothes and blurred my vision. The corn was still, almost unnaturally so, as I stepped deeper into the field. There was no breeze, no rustle, just the sound of raindrops hitting the leaves in heavy, rhythmic beats. I could feel my pulse quickening, my skin prickling with unease. Then, I saw it. It was half hidden among the stalks, so old and faded that I almost missed it. An old scarecrow, barely standing, its head slumped at an odd angle, its arms hanging limp as if they were too tired to keep up the pretense of scaring anything away. I didn't remember seeing it before, and I couldn't imagine why anyone would leave it there in such disrepair. Its clothes were ragged, and its face, a burlap sack sewn with dark, uneven stitches, had a strange expression, something that wasn't quite a smile, but close enough to be unsettling. But that wasn't what made me stop. As I moved closer, I saw the symbols, carved deep into the wood of its arms, etched onto the surface of its face. Symbols I didn't recognize, twisted shapes and jagged lines that seemed to pulse under the rain. They looked wrong, somehow, like they didn't belong in a place like this. I reached out, almost without thinking, to touch one of the carvings, but the moment my hand brushed against the wood, a chill shot through me, cold as ice, settling deep in my bones. I pulled back, my heart pounding, a part of me wanted to run, to leave the field and never come back. But something held me there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the pull of the unknown, that dark magnetism that keeps you rooted even when every instinct is screaming at you to leave. The rain picked up, hammering down so hard that it drowned out every other sound. I took a step back from the scarecrow, and for a moment, everything went still. The rain seemed to hang in the air, frozen, as if the whole field had taken a breath. Then I heard it, a voice, faint, like a whisper carried on the wind, too quiet to make out but clear enough that I knew it was there. It was coming from deep within the field, somewhere beyond the rows of corn. I turned, straining to see, but all I could make out was darkness. I took a few steps forward, drawn by the sound, my heart pounding in my ears. The voice grew louder, a low murmur that seemed to echo through the corn, wrapping around me, pulling me in, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I stood there, drenched, alone, listening to the silence. The rain had eased up, the wind still, but the feeling hadn't left me, that sense of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. I looked back at the scarecrow, its face tilted down toward me, the carved symbols seeming to shimmer in the dim light. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. The scarecrow, the symbols, the voice in the field. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that it was just my imagination, that I was letting an old story get the better of me. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew the truth. Something had changed. The field had shown me a glimpse of its secrets, and I couldn't ignore it. The whispers, the shadows, the strange symbols. They weren't just stories. They were real as the rain and the dark, empty sky above. And I knew, deep down, that whatever was out there, it wasn't finished with me yet. On the sixth night, I went back. It was as if something was drawing me in, deeper into that field. I told myself I just wanted answers. That maybe, just maybe, I could make sense of what was happening. But there was more to it than that. I felt like I was walking a thin line, a razor's edge between curiosity and something darker. It was as if the field had started calling to me, whispering my name on the wind, pulling me back no matter how hard I tried to resist. I stepped into the field, rain pounding down around me, soaking through my clothes. The air was thick, heavy, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in, squeezing my chest tighter with each step. I moved carefully, eyes scanning the rows, expecting to see the scarecrow in its strange, twisted pose. But tonight it was gone. I checked the spot where it had been, the earth disturbed, as though something had dragged it away. I wandered deeper, past the spot where the scarecrow once stood, feeling that pull grow stronger, drawing me toward the heart of the field. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A small patch of dirt, disturbed and muddy, half buried beneath the rain-soaked corn stalks. Something was sticking out of the ground, partially exposed, as if someone had hurriedly tried to cover it. I knelt down, digging through the wet earth with my hands, fingers numb from the cold rain. And there, under the soil, I found it, a battered, worn journal, its cover barely holding together, pages waterlogged and torn. My hands shook as I brushed the dirt away, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. Somehow, I knew that whatever lay within those pages would be something I wasn't meant to see. I opened the journal, flipping through the faded, smeared writing, trying to make sense of it. The handwriting was frantic, scrawled with a shaky hand, each word written with a desperation that sent chills up my spine. The entries, they described everything I had been experiencing. The footsteps, the whispers, the shadows moving in the field. The author had been someone like me, an outsider who had wandered too close, drawn in by curiosity. They described a night just like this, rain pounding down, feeling the weight of eyes watching from every direction. And then I read something that made my blood run cold. The journal described an encounter, something the author had seen among the corn rows. A figure, standing at a distance, just barely visible in the rain. The figure wore tattered clothes, its face hidden in shadow. But its eyes, the author wrote about those eyes in a way that left no room for doubt. Those eyes were watching, waiting, and filled with a hunger that went beyond anything human. I kept reading, my fingers trembling as I turned each page. The final entries were short, hurried, the handwriting growing messier, more erratic. I tried to leave, one entry read. I tried to get out of the field, but the rows, they kept shifting. I kept turning, and no matter which way I went, I was always back here in the center, like the field wouldn't let me go. I swallowed hard, the words echoing in my mind as I glanced around. The rain was coming down harder now, and the corn, once tall and towering, seemed to close in around me, like a wall on all sides. I stood up, clutching the journal in my hand, heart racing. I tried to walk back, retracing my steps, but everything looked different. The rows seemed to shift as I walked, twisting and narrowing, no longer familiar. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, a sense of dread tightening in my chest. I turned one way, then the other, but every direction looked the same. Endless rows of corn, stretching out, closing in, no end in sight. I began to walk faster, the mud clinging to my boots, pulling me down with every step. Panic started to creep in, filling my mind with thoughts I couldn't control. Then I heard it, a voice, faint but clear, coming from somewhere deep in the rows. It was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried through the rain, each word chilling me to the core. You shouldn't have come here. The voice was calm, steady, filled with a cold certainty that made my skin crawl. I stopped, heart hammering, every instinct telling me to run, to get out. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the mud itself was holding me in place. And then I saw it, a figure, just beyond the reach of the rain, standing still among the corn. Its shape was blurred, shadowed, but those eyes, those same eyes the journal had described, they were fixed on me, unblinking, cold, as if they could see right through me, down to my very soul. Leave while you still can, the voice whispered, barely audible over the rain. I stumbled back, the journal slipping from my hands, heart racing as I tried to turn, try to find my way out. But the corn seemed to shift with me, closing in tighter, blocking my path at every turn. I could feel those eyes on me, following, watching, waiting. My breaths came in short, panicked gasps, the rain blurring my vision, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I turned again, desperate, frantic, but there was no way out. The rows stretched endlessly, shifting, twisting, like the field itself was alive, trapping me within its embrace. And somewhere, just out of sight, I could still feel that figure, watching, waiting. The voice came again, softer this time, almost a whisper, barely audible over the rain. They never leave, and neither will you. And with that, the field fell silent, the rain fading into an eerie quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of corn around me. I knew, in that moment, that I was no longer alone. I stood there, surrounded by endless rows of corn, the whispers echoing through the stalks, closing in on me from every direction. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but my heartbeat still thundered in my ears, a steady reminder that I was not alone. In that suffocating silence, I felt trapped, like the field was holding me, pulling me deeper, away from any chance of escape. But if it were you, what would you have done? Imagine it for a moment. You're standing in the heart of an endless cornfield, the sky dark and heavy above, with whispers seeping through the air, circling you like a slow, unbroken chant. You know something is out there, watching, lurking just beyond your sight. Maybe it's the land itself, ancient and hungry. Or maybe it's something even darker, a presence that's waited years, centuries even, to find someone like you. Would you keep moving forward, hoping to find a way out? Or would you freeze, letting that fear sink into your bones, feeling it paralyze you, like roots weaving around your feet, holding you in place? Think about it. How far would you go before that fear took hold, before you knew you were truly, utterly lost? And what do you think lies hidden here in this field? Do you believe it's something ancient, woven into the soil, into every single stalk of corn? Or is it the restless spirit of those who vanished before, their energy trapped, roaming, waiting to pull another soul down with them? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think a place can hold a memory, a dark memory, one that seeps into the very ground? Or do you think it's something else entirely, something even more unimaginable? Whatever it is, I can tell you one thing. Once you've been touched by it, it never leaves. The field has a way of calling you back, of embedding itself in your mind, haunting you, long after you've left its borders. So tell me, would you dare to walk those rows, to feel that whisper of something ancient watching, waiting? And if you could go back, would you leave while you still could? Or would you be drawn in, unable to resist the pull of the unknown? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes the only way to understand something like this is to face it together. My heart pounded as I tried to steady my breath, every nerve screaming for me to run. With a final burst of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted, feet sinking into the mud with each desperate step. The corn stalks whipped past, brushing against my face, leaving shallow scratches, but I didn't stop. I could hear them behind me, those whispers growing louder, forming a low chant, circling, closing in. The rows stretched endlessly before me, twisting and bending like some cruel maze. Each path seemed to lead nowhere, the corn towering above, swallowing the night whole. But then, up ahead, I saw it, an opening, a clearing where the stalks parted, revealing an empty patch in the field. With no other choice, I ran toward it, hoping for some kind of escape, praying it might lead me out of this nightmare. But when I stumbled into the clearing, I froze. They were there, standing still in a wide circle around me, like guardians of a forgotten graveyard. Figures draped in worn clothes, heads slumped forward, their faces hidden in shadow. But as lightning cracked above, their faces came into view, illuminated in stark, horrifying detail. They weren't ordinary scarecrows. No, these were lifelike, their eyes hollow and empty, mouths frozen in silent screams, faces twisted in agony, terror etched into every inch, as if each figure had been caught in their last, desperate moment before being taken. I tried to look away, but my gaze kept drifting from one face to the next. Some were old, wrinkled with time. Others were young, faces I'd recognized from town. People who'd disappeared over the years, their fates unknown until now. And then my eyes landed on one figure, slouched over, his face partially hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. My stomach twisted in dread. I recognized him, the author of the journal, the man who'd tried to escape before me. I stumbled backward, ball rising in my throat as the full horror sank in. These were the lost souls of the field, bound to it, forever watching, forever waiting, trapped between life and death. And then I realized, with an icy, sinking feeling, that I was next. The whispers grew louder, closing in, a voice pressing into my mind, suffocating me. "Stay," it hissed, cold and unyielding. "You're one of us now." I shook my head, backing away, but my feet felt heavy, rooted to the ground as if the earth itself were pulling me down. I tried to scream, but the sound barely left my lips, swallowed by the rain and the whispers. leaving only a strangled gasp in its place. I looked down, feeling something cold and coarse against my skin. My hands, they were changing, hardening, turning to rough, brittle straw, as if the field itself was reclaiming me, binding me to the land. Desperate, I clawed at my arms, trying to shake free, but the transformation was relentless. My vision blurred, rain filling my eyes, my skin cracking, splitting apart, turning to straw. My mind screamed, fighting to stay conscious, but it was like sinking into darkness, my body betraying me with every agonizing second. As the last bit of life slipped from my limbs, I saw them, the other scarecrows, turning their hollow eyes toward me, welcoming me into their silent ranks. My vision dimmed, fading until all I could see was darkness. All I could feel was the rain, relentless, cold, echoing through me as I became one of them. The final scream tore from my throat, but it was lost to the night, swallowed by the endless field, the rain, and the silence. And in that stillness, I knew I would be here forever, watching, waiting, just another lifeless guardian of this haunted land. My voice, just one more whisper on the wind. So, what do you think? Does the field call to you too? Or was it just an overactive imagination, piecing together shadows and whispers into something more sinister? Maybe there's a rational explanation, or maybe, just maybe, some places truly are haunted, cursed to hold those who wander too far, who dare to listen to the whispers. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever heard stories like this? Does your town have its own tales of haunted fields or places where people go missing? Places that feel wrong? Tell me in the comments below. Who knows? Maybe your story will be the next one I share. Or maybe there are places out there, places we pass every day, carrying secrets we'll never fully understand. If this story left you with a chill, if you're curious about what lies hidden in the dark corners of our world, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next journey into the unknown. I promise, there are even darker, more terrifying stories waiting to be uncovered. We've only just begun to scratch the surface, and who knows where our search will take us next. Stay safe, and remember, some places are best left alone. Until next time, sleep well if you can,